What's up guys, Slash here. Today we're going to ask the question, is Gogeta still dead? Let's find out. Here we are, we have Gogeta. Now, we want to look at what makes the deck still have any value against the current format today. And the deck still has a lot of free plays. It has cheap cards from the latest support as well. So we've got like Kumbo, we've got the Berserk, Goku, there's a lot of things. We're running around 9 counters total. So we have 2 of these, we've got 3 Support of the Dark Empires, and 3 Petrifications. So we've got a lot of things to be able to stall your opponent, but do expect to lose some counters, because we have the effect here from the leader. Send 5 cards from the top of your deck to your warp, so there's a good chance you're probably going to lose one of your counters. But that's not a problem, because we have a lot of damage, and we're going more for damage anyway. We're running 56 cards. That's actually not that much, because on turn 1 you're going to instantly lose 5, and then turn 2 you'll lose another 5. You'll roughly do that about probably 3, maybe 4 times, depending on what you hit into your warp. But what we're looking at here is we're trying to maximize the amount of damage that we can as early as possible. So with your leader here, let's start with the once per turn. When you play a battle card using Union Fusion, draw 1 card. So that is with these cards. We have these cards as well. And then of course when this card attacks, draw 1, then add up to 1 card from your life to your hand. And then when your life is 4 or less, you may draw 1, switch 1, flip this card over. So the Awakened side here is pretty handy too. Once per turn, when you play a battle card using Union Fusion skill, draw 1 card. When this card attacks, draw 1, then send up to 5 cards from the top of your deck to your warp. And then you have the Activate main here. Once per turn, add 1 card from your life to your hand, choose up to 2 of your black battle cards with an energy cost of 1, and they get 10k power until the end of your opponent's next turn. So that's going to be very handy, because on turn 1 we can pump out a lot of 1 costs. And then of course when it gets to turn 2, 3 onwards, we'll get to that very shortly. Now let's start with just having an overview of the deck and what some of the cards do. So we have of course the Thwarting the Dark Empire, the one of. Of course if you lose this and it's in your warp, you've got your Gokus that can be able to take it back to your hand for you. The Beyond All Limits. We also are running 3 copies of the Martial Melee. So if you're wondering why we're running these, is because we can actually pump them out for free. I've had plenty of games now in a row where I will play the Pycon Unison, and this is in a fantastic unison for the deck. +1, Activate main, choose 2 of your black battle cards with an energy cost of 1, and they get 10k power until the end of your opponent's next turn. So on top of that, we're adding markers. Now when this card can't attack if it has 2 or fewer markers on it though. So what you're trying to do is you want to pump this out on turn 1. Your opponent's probably going to try to attack it on turn 1. If they succeed, that's okay. If you lose Unison, that's not a problem. We now have some cards in drop which can help with some of our overwhelms for earlier game. Now we also have the effect here from Supreme Kai. Now Supreme Kai is if your leader is a Black Sang only card, you place this card at the bottom of your deck from your warp. If you don't have a Unison in play, choose 1 black Unison with no specified costs and 15k power from your hand or warp and play it with a marker on it. You can't play Unisons for the turn. That doesn't mean that you can still put a marker underneath it, so you can still do that, that's no problem. But the cool effect here from our Pycon is the -3. That's what we're trying to achieve here. Play 1 black battle card with an energy cost of 6 and the Union Fusion skill from your drop or warp. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to pump out one of these by turn 2 or 3, which is very easy to do. It just requires a little bit of luck, and that's what makes this deck still a little bit dead. But we have a lot of damage overall in the deck that can sustain it for a later game as well. Now we also have ourselves all these 1-drops here. They all do different things. This one's very handy for a bit of stalling. If your leader is a Black Saiyan, when your opponent activates a counter skill, they choose 1 card in their hand and send it to their warp. So you can also use these as beat sticks to help self-awaken if you need to. This Goku is a unique double strike, and then of course you have the effect here. When your opponent adds a card from their deck to their hand using a non-leader card skill, this card gets 10k power until the end of your next turn. So of course using your leader's effect, this will be a 25k double strike to your opponent. Now this one is a critical. More or less the same thing, but when your opponent plays a battle card with an energy cost greater than their current energy using a skill, this card gets 10k power until the end of your next turn. And then finally we have Vegeta, the True Fighting Spirit. Now this one is once per turn, if your leader is Black Saiyan, when your opponent switches their energy to active mode, using a non-awakened skill, they choose one card in their hand and send it to their warp. Now, of course, if you're versing a blue deck in general, you're probably going to run more copies of this card, so you can just keep some on your sideboard. But for the general purpose of the deck, I just run one because it's also a deflect card, so it's going to avoid some of those counterplays to try and at least get one of your 1-drops on field. Now, we have the 4 Vegetas here. So what we're trying to do is we want to run a split amount of Gokus and Vegetas that are all 5Ks. That will help us be able to do our Union Fusion here. Now, the cards itself, our little boss monsters, we have this one itself. You have this cool little permanent here. You can choose battle cards in your warp when choosing cards to use with this card's Union skill from your hand. If you do, place the chosen cards in your drop to your warp. And then of course we've got the activate main here. The once per turn, you can place one of your Gokus and Vegetas that are 5k from your warp to your drop. Switch this card to active mode, or it's the other way around, from your drop to your warp. Something like that. And then of course we've also got the Gogeta Thwarting the Dark Empire. The 25k double strike, when this card attacks, choose one of your opponent's battle cards and send it to its owner's warp. So it's just a very good card, and we know why it's now limited to 1. And then of course we've got the Gogeta Fearless Fusion. Now this one is a 16k blocker. When this card is played, choose one of your opponent's battle cards where the energy costs are 4 or less, ignoring barrier, and send it to its owner's warp. This will be very, very handy for that early to mid-range game. And then yeah, for the rest, so we're trying to get a nice little split between our Gokus and Vegetas here, because we want to have an equal amount more or less to be able to get our Union Fusions onto the field. But for a bit of extra damage for the deck, we have 3 copies of Cumber. We should know by now, it's a dual attack that gives you your opponent's servant, so you're going to choose one of their cards that are in rest mode, so then it obviously can't restand for the next turn. And then you've got a 19k dual attack on the field. And then of course we have 2 copies of the SSG Trunks, Power Awakened. Now, why we run 2 copies is because it helps us when you play this card to be able to choose 3 cards in your warp and send it back to your drop to help you with your overrounds. And it's still a deflect dual attack 20k, so it's got some damage in it. We also run 2 copies of Trunks Time Regulator. I was running more, but I noticed that if you at least see one of the Power Awakened Trunks, you don't need any more copies of the Time Regulators, because we still have a lot of other overrounds as well. We also have the 3 copies of the Beyond All Limits. This is just going to help get our cards back to hand, so that also includes your Supreme Kai counters if you need to. We also run 2 of the copies of the SS4 Vegetas. Now, these are quite expensive. If you can't afford them, there are other options of the Vegetas that you can run. But this is a very good card for the deck, because you have the activate main here. If your leader is black, your opponent has 3 or more energy, and you have a Goku Xeno with an original power of 30k or more in play. Play this card from your hand, and this card gets critical for the turn. So that will pump out one of these, and now this is going to be a 30k critical. And when this card is played, choose one of your opponent's battle cards, send it to its owner's warp. So you got some removal there too. We also have an SS Bardock for a little bit of Floodgate to your opponent. Your opponent can only attack 1 time with battle cards during their next turn, so it's really going to slow them down. Then of course we have 1 copy of Cumber. I was running 2, but I noticed that you don't always have the opportunity to be able to play this card, because sometimes in a late game your opponent may not have 2 battle cards on their field. So this is always a handy thing to have if you have that opportunity, but it's not necessary because we have a lot of other big boss damage here. We also have 2 copies of Super Kamehameha. This is just a really good counter. We know it by now. We also have 1 Kraken Space Time. It's very handy for that early damage to your opponent. So if they're sitting on like 5 lives and you want to put them to 3, for 1 energy, this does the job. And then of course finally we have the Berserk Instincts. This will be a 25k double strike to your opponent, and then it stays in rest mode. But that's no problem, because we have plenty of other damage in here too. And then for the Z deck, we also have the final Kamehameha here. Now this is from the new set. This is actually a really good card for the deck. It's an activate battle limit 1. If your battle card with an energy cost of 6 or more is attacking, you may place 1 of your Z energy in your drop and remove this card from the game. Choose one of your opponent's battle cards and send it to its owner's warp. Then choose one of the cards attacking, and it gets 10k power for the battle. But it's more of, you can use this in the middle of a fight to be able to just deal with an opponent's attack. So let's say they're attacking you with a 8 cost Sin Shinron, right? And they're swinging at you. You can just do the activate battle of this and then get rid of their card. So you cancel out the attack. And then of course we've got 1 copy of Cumber. This is just actually a very handy card, I've noticed. It's 2 energy, so it's a little bit energy heavy. But what you can do is you play this card, you give your opponent's card in rest mode Servant, and then of course you attack with this card and then give their other card Servant too. So then you really can just punish their field for the next turn. And then of course we've got one copy of the Vegeta just to help self-awaken if your opponent's being a pain in the ass. We also have one Demegra. I mean, it's there. You can use it if you want to. It's not that great. You can always side in other things, but it's always nice to have multiple tools in your deck so you have options. And then of course we have the Majin Buu, which can just remove cards from their field, and this will swallow it up. Then of course for side deck options, if you can't afford the SS4 Vegetas, the cheapest one you can go for would be this one. It's a 30k crit. When this card attacks, you can choose any number of your opponent's cards where the energy cost adds up to 4 or less and send them to the owner's warp. So you can remove some cards if you need to. Another Berserk Instinct if you want to run that. And then of course you can run Koisekais to help shuffle your hand around and stop those pesky counterplays from your opponent. So yeah, this is more or less the deck. And I would say for your turns 1, 2, and 3, turn 1, try to set up your Unison as fast as you can. If you don't see it, that's no problem. Do your top 5 from your leader. Try to get your Supreme Kai to activate where you get to play your Unison. Turn 2, play a Gogeta Fearless Fusion or a Cumber if you can, and just keep that damage on your field going. Then Awaken, of course, and keep some energy up for your defense though, because you want to be able to take your own lives from your leader's effect, rather than your opponent being able to be in control of taking the damage to you. And then of course for turn 3, go for your Gogeta free play from your Unison. So you can play your 6-drop, and you can make it a 25k dual attack double strike, and then keep your aggression going to your opponent. That's all you need to do, and that's more or less the whole deck. So, I hope you liked the video. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. Subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate it. It helps me a lot. And thanks for watching. Peace. Links to the deck will be in the video description.